Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Hello everybody, welcome to Ask Rob and Rob, the show where you get your questions in, quite often property related, and we give you our answers. We've got two great questions coming up this week. But before we get going, let's give you a quick reminder how you can get involved and get your question in.
Yes, just give us a call, 013 808 0035. That's 013 808 0035. Or just as good, you can go over to the website at propertyhub.net/ask and leave us a voicemail there instead. When you do so, leave us your question and please, come on, leave us your name as well. Otherwise, we'll have to make one up for you. So we'll find out what name Rob is going to give this questioner after we hear the question itself.
Hi Rob and Rob, big fan of the podcast. First time buyer, just offered on the property. It went up for 150,000 and he ended up having a bit of a bidding war and got up to 175. More than happy to pay that, but obviously not sure if the surveyor will value it at 175. Just wondering what my options are if the surveyor comes back with a big down valuation. Do plan to make it a 3-bed as a 5 metre wide front bedroom on a terrace property. There is nothing really comparable in the local area. A terrace house of that size has never sold. So just wondering what you think about possible valuation, possible down valuation, what my options are if I can argue the case as nothing similar sold. There are some, houses of a smaller square footage that have sold for 175 in the local area, but like I say, nothing comparable of a terrace. Let us know what you think. Love the podcast. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Well, thank you, Noel. Great question. First of all, congratulations on winning your bidding war. You don't know yet if you've overpaid, but you're happy with the value. And that is the most important thing, as long as the surveyor agrees with you, because it sounds like you're using a mortgage. And if you're using a mortgage, the surveyor will have to agree with you. Because let's cover first of all what will happen if the surveyor doesn't agree with you. Well, we'll talk about an appeal in a moment, but ultimately if that appeal fails, then you will have to put a larger deposit in. So for example, if the surveyor valued the property at 150, even though you'd agreed a price of 175, then you would only be able to get your mortgage against the value of 150. So if you were on a 10% deposit product, whereas if you're buying at 150, you'd put 15k in, you would have to put the 15k in plus the other 25k on top, meaning that your deposit has gone from 15 to 40. That's quite a jump. So you need to know the downside before you go ahead. Now, will the surveyor agree the price? It's possible, but it sounds like it's going to be difficult for the surveyor. Not that they don't agree with you, it's just that they've got nothing to compare it to. And that's what surveyors do. They don't take a guess. They don't know the market that well that they can start valuing properties by themselves, or very few do. Most of them will just look at local comparables and say, okay, what has sold recently in this area and at what price? And they play it safe because it's in their interests to play it safe, because they don't want any comeback from the lender if you suddenly get yourself into trouble and the value of the property is nowhere near what they said it was. So they play it safe. So they will look at the closest style properties to what you have. Now, you're saying there's nothing else quite like it, but that tends to mean that they're going to play it cautiously. Now, you may get really lucky and they may value at the price that you've decided to buy it for. And actually, the asking price may have just been low and 175 is perfectly fine. Unfortunately, you're not going to find out until the event and the value has been and gives you some feedback. Now, if you don't like the number they come back with, you can appeal. But I don't want to build your hopes up, because I've never known anybody ever successfully overturn a valuer's decision, even with really strong evidence. And I've seen appeals that should absolutely have been overturned with rock solid evidence, and it just hasn't happened. You don't have any evidence, unfortunately. You just have a view. So if you do get the property downvalued, although technically you could appeal, I really wouldn't waste your time. You either have to decide to put the extra deposit in or move on. I know it's probably not what the answer you want to hear, but it is the truth, and that's what will play out. So I wish you the best of luck, Noel. I do hope that you're able to get the property that you want. I hope it's at the right value and the surveyor agrees, but you have to be prepared for what happens if they don't.
So a collective crossing of fingers for Noel, please. And while we're all doing that, let's move on to hear this question from Max.
Hi Rob and Rob, my name's Max. I've got a question reference yield. I am currently working out how much money I might make on a particular deal after I've paid all my fees. But one of the fees that I put in, which I never seem to hear you guys talk about, is landlord insurance. So I know obviously this is optional, but could you just maybe talk about it a little bit on your podcast so we can get an idea of whether it's absolutely necessary, how much insurance we should be getting, and comments of that nature? Thank you. Bye-bye.
Max, good question. Thank you. Let's start with a bit of terminology because it's a bit confusing, the whole world of insurance. So when people talk about landlord insurance, they normally mean buildings insurance and optionally contents insurance, just like you'd get on your own home, but you need to have a special policy if you're a landlord. So for example, if you were living somewhere, then you moved out to rent it out, you couldn't just keep the same insurance policy going. You need to change to a completely different policy because the risk profile is different. A landlord's insurance policy will always have a buildings insurance element, although you can make choices about the type of risks that you insure against and the excesses and things like that. You may then choose to insure your own contents. Tenants' contents are always going to be insured separately by the tenant. And then there's also in a landlord policy an element of public liability insurance as well. So if the tenant, for example, trips down the stairs and sues you, you should be covered by that element. When you are working out what return you'll make from a property, you should factor that cost in. You're completely right, just like you would all the other costs that you might come across. The reason it doesn't tend to get talked about is that it tends to be pretty inexpensive. So from memory, I don't think I've ever paid more than about £200 for a year's insurance policy. And even that would be on more expensive properties. It can end up being a fair bit less. So it is a cost to factor in. But for the purposes of comparing one property with another, the insurance is always going to cost roughly the same. So it's not relevant to factor into a comparison. The exception to that would be flats, because if you're buying a flat or an apartment, normally the insurance will be covered by the block and paid as part of your service charge. So it's worth checking to make sure that is the case, because there'll be the odd exception, but broadly that is the case. So in that situation, if you're buying a house, you'd have to factor in additional insurance. But if you're buying a flat, you'd need to know how much the service charge would cost you, but then there'd be no additional insurance charge on top of that. Now, there is another type of insurance that sometimes falls under the bracket of landlord insurance, but normally is referred to by a separate name, which is rent guarantee insurance. So that is different from the physical property itself. It's to do with your rental income stream. The idea with rent guarantee insurance is that if the tenant stops paying, the insurance policy will kick in and start paying you instead. And often it will cover the legal process of trying to remove that tenant if they continue not paying as well. This has become less attractive in recent years because policies have got a lot more expensive and the conditions have made them less attractive. So for example, the excess is higher or it only kicks in after a certain number of months of the rent not being paid. So it may still be something you want to do. And if you do, then that is a cost that you should factor in separately because it does tend to be quite a bit more expensive. So lots in there, but to summarise, the only thing that is actually essential is the buildings element of your landlord insurance policy. Everything else is optional, but the buildings element you need because your lender, if you have one, is going to insist on it. And if you don't have a lender, you probably want it anyway, because if the absolute worst happened and the house completely burnt down, you're probably not going to be able to shrug it off and just pay for the whole thing to be rebuilt. So I hope that helps you out with your yield calculation, Max, and gives you a few extra things to be thinking about as well.
Well, thank you, Noel. Thank you, Max, for your questions. And thank you for listening. We'll be back on Thursday with the Property Podcast. And of course, back same time, same place next week with Ask Rob and Rob. And if you want something extra in between, then you can check out AOB, our new business podcast, which you can find on its own separate feed. Just search Any Other Business and you can listen to our thoughts on the business world too. So plenty of podcast joy to keep you going. We'll speak with you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.